So, heating our homes into a zero carbon future, why is it a challenge? And where are the challenges and where are some of the solutions is really my focus. Yes, I teach at the Centre for Alternative Technology, although I've been grabbed by Cheshire because I'm sitting here in Cheshire at the moment. So a lot of my teaching is at a distance, although I go down to Machynlleth when, and I will be doing in 10 days time when sort of needed down there. Good. So we're going to have a look at the challenge essentially of heating our homes into a zero carbon future. We all aspire, hope, there's a lot of commitment out there, but do we know the way yet towards the zero carbon future? So we'll look at current demand and current supply in terms of zero carbon energy, and in particular energy for heating. And then we'll look at some solutions. Some of those solutions that we will look at are insulation and air tightness to reduce demand, and then alternatives to gas and oil for heating. And we'll look briefly through those electricity, hydrogen heat pumps, and the possibility of different ways of distributing heating. So we're sometimes reassured by the idea that 41% of our energy this year or this month or today has come from renewables. But then we're faced with this data, which suggests otherwise, and that this is our domestic energy use. And it's not so very different from our national energy use in lots of ways, in that we use a lot of gas. We use a lot of gas in heating our homes. In particular, we use a certain amount of oil. About 25% of the energy we use in our homes, which isn't just all for heating, is electricity, and then there's some use of biofuels. So how does that fit the 41%? Let's have a look. That 41% is just 41% of our electricity demand that is dealt with by renewables. So it doesn't include very much of the energy for heating at all. So if 41% of that quarter there, that was yellow on that one, is from renewables, then essentially none of the rest is from renewables. And if we use 3/4 of the energy used in our home for heating, that's about 8 times more energy than is currently generated from renewables in terms of our in-the-house proportion of that, or 7 times more than renewables plus nuclear, which is a low carbon energy source in at least many respects. And if we include biofuels, it's still 5 times more than renewables. The energy we use for heating is still 5 times more than that proportion than is generated from renewables. So we've got to do something pretty drastic to generate enough more energy to cover that, or to reduce our energy demand so that we're within that range, within the range that is supplied by renewables, or that can be supplied. So we probably need to approach this from both ends. One additional challenge is that our heating demand, as we're all here sitting sort of with at least cold weather outside the windows, some of us warmer, some of us cooler, some of us in dressing gowns and warm jumpers, some of us with just a bit of heating on, very aware that there's a seasonal dependence to our heating. And if this graph shows the comparison between the electricity demand, otherwise known as power, the red-ish line there, transport demand, which is fairly steady, and the heating demand, which most definitely is not steady around the year. These are sort of, you can see the curves around the year. Okay, we use something like 6 or 7 times more energy per day, per week in the winter for heating than we do in the summer. The summer being predominantly for hot water, at least. And this doesn't include any significant demand in here for cooling. yeah. So, as I said, we need to approach this need from both directions. And I thought we should start this by looking at insulation and airtightness and our heating controls. This may be a familiar picture already to many of you, with the various different heat losses identified. So, reducing these heat losses from our home, we want 250 to 300 millimeters of loft insulation. That's a foot in old money, or most of a foot, not the 2 inches that has probably dropped to an inch that people may have installed 20, 30 years ago. A good loose layer of that much loft insulation. If it's glass fiber, if it's a foam insulation, then maybe half of that will do the same trick. Half that thickness will do the same trick, but that's still 6 inches. We need to stop drafts. They're another huge energy loss, where all of the warm air from the home is drifting, being blown, being sucked out from, it's not just windows, it's out through all the penetrations in the envelope of the building, the heated envelope. So, I mean, above me here, I've got a light fitting. There will be heat, warm air, being drawn upwards around the light fitting out into the loft space, because warm air is buoyant and rises. The loft hatch is a major point for this, and there'll be cold air coming in around power sockets downstairs and drafts under doors, around plumbing fittings and all sorts. So reduce our drafts and then organize them. We do need some fresh air. We absolutely do need some fresh air, and mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, MVHR, is one way of sorting that, or on-demand extract ventilation, which is a general extract from kitchens and bathrooms, boosted as and when the humidity and the need is high. So the first two are loft insulation and drafts, basically. Insulating our cavities. Most of us live in homes with twin layer walls, and cavity insulation is possible in those. Alternatively, internally insulating the walls and or externally insulating the walls can reduce a loss through the walls of 25 to 30% down very considerably, to reduce that bulk load of energy that we lose. We lose some through the floor. It becomes more difficult to do anything through the floor, but of course we can glaze, and whenever we're replacing windows, we should be looking at upgrading them. Upgrading them carefully though, upgrading them so that we don't leave drafts around and under windowsills and around the edges. A lot of window foams, unfortunately, are pretty bad at managing the fitting that well. Not just drafts, but what's called thermal bridging, where heat can leak out around the around apertures like windows and doors, because the window reveals are a shorter pathway for heat to get through. I'll leave it at that for now. Do we live in all of our rooms? Do we need them all equally warm? Do we have choices in that as to which rooms we heat to what temperature at what time of day? Generally speaking, the answer for most of us is yes. We can make those choices. We may be able to do that by managing the on-the-wall thermostat, maybe not enough RAD-stats, thermal radiation thermostats. Of course, we know about them. Do we use them as well as we should? Can we encourage other people to use them more? Turn them down in rooms that aren't occupied and don't need heating. So controlling our energy, increasingly it's becoming possible to, there are more and more electronic-based devices that can measure the temperature, the humidity, the air quality in spaces, monitor them, and then manage our heating as a result. And that may be a direction that we want to transition to, particularly if we need an upgrade in our heating system. So we're going to be going for an upgrade in our thermostat system as well. May want to go for something just that shade more in the way of investment to control our energy down. It can predict, these can look at the weather, they can look at your living patterns, and predict which rooms you're going to want warm and when. None of these things are absolutely straightforward. There's no one solution fits all, but sorry, that's back on that one. It's a case of looking at your needs and fulfilling the needs, and rather than being prepared to interact with it in lots of ways, actually. So the different ways we can replace our oil and gas in heating. Sorry, I should have had a transition slide there, I didn't. Okay, we know how to use electricity for heating. I've got a little standing electric heater in my room here. It's just catching up a little bit of heat so that I don't need to heat the rest of the house. It's sort of one more like this, really, in lots of ways. Fan heaters, radiant heaters. This one's actually more of a convector. This is a convector on the wall, but is it a storage one? It may be, I'm not too sure where the picture came from. Or a living heat equivalent one, which is mostly light, but it generates some heat into the room too. But if we're going to replace using all that oil and gas with electricity for heating and still provide the same amount of heating, we're going to need to go for 8 times more electricity to do that. Obviously, we can bring that down by insulation, but that will, I mean, we can do that individually. We can insulate our homes. It needs policy action to take that out across everybody in the country to reduce those needs. We also need electricity available at the amount we need when we need it. So that may be storage of electricity, and it may be storage of heat to manage that. We're not in a position to store heat usefully between summer and winter. We have plenty of heat around us in the summer, we need it in the winter. But storage for electricity is on the rise. It's not on the rise as fast as we'd like it to be in order to be able to achieve this, but it's on the rise. So electricity probably can't be relied on to do the job we need, not on its own at any rate. Hydrogen. Hydrogen can be produced when there's excess electricity in the system. So when there's plenty of wind and or plenty of sunshine, and not very much, well, not as much electricity is being required, water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, and hydrogen produced and transported to where it's needed. Hydrogen can be burnt sort of on your cooker. If you haven't transferred to electricity for a cooker, and it's probably a good move to do that, transfer across for electric cooker. It can also be, I mean, this is a hydrogen ready gas boiler, which or a hydrogen fuel cell. So it can be used as if it was a gas boiler in that sort of setting. Gas appliances with some adaptation. Many of us will remember the adaptation required from coal gas to natural gas back in the 60s, 70s? Not sure, around about 1970. It was rolled across the country. Everybody, every home with gas had to have those adaptations in their boilers, in their cookers, so that we could move to natural gas. The same, up to a point, the same sort of thing is possible with hydrogen. Hydrogen's a bit tricky. It's a very, very small gas molecule, and it escapes much more readily than a methane molecule from wherever you try to store it or wherever you try to transmit it. Not in a plume of hydrogen, not in a dangerous, burnable, explodable way, but in a way that it's sort of, you know, pipes may need further lining and that sort of thing. Hydrogen can produce high temperatures, and we just talked about net distribution and storage. Yep. But it's quite expensive to produce, because although we can split water by electrolysis, and that's called green hydrogen, green in terms of eco, and that can be done at 80% efficiency, so we only lose about a fifth of the original energy. I think that's before transport. Another way of producing hydrogen is by extracting natural gas, that's methane, and steam reformation, which is a chemical process, releases the carbon dioxide. Methane is carbon and hydrogen combined, and you see H4 burning, sort of combining that with water, the water in steam can release carbon dioxide in one direction and hydrogen in the other. So doing that requires capturing that carbon dioxide, otherwise we're back where we started, as if we were burning the gas in the first place. And carbon capture and storage is under development. It's been under development a while. We know it works at lab scale, but so far development to a larger scale hasn't quite got there. At best, it looks as if this second route here could potentially be about 65% efficient. In other words, using 65%, 2/3 of the energy from the electricity would be transferred onwards into the hydrogen as it would be supplied to us. Only 1/3 would be lost. 1/3 still quite a lot of it. It means that we have to make time and a half as much electricity if we're going to be supplying the energy as hydrogen as if we were supplying it as electricity. So yes, either process allows hydrogen to be produced from spare electricity, but neither of them come without some challenges in terms of the direction of hydrogen. The other thing about hydrogen is that it's actually a potentially very useful fuel. If it's stored, then it can be, electricity can be generated back from it and transmitted to us in times when there's no wind and there's no sun. And so it's one of those mechanisms for energy storage to manage the intermittency of wind and sun. It's also a mobile fuel. This image here is a hydrogen car. It's got a tank, a hydrogen tank, compressed. You know, we're probably familiar with compressed propane tanks, cylinders. This car has hydrogen in a similar cylinder and runs on hydrogen. Cars, we know we can do with electricity. Trains, we know we can do with electricity, but cars, trains, tractors, airplane fuel, mobile fuels are at a premium in a different sort of way. Hydrogen is a possibility for that, but we need to be able to supply that hydrogen. And any cubic meter of hydrogen can't be used both for transport and for heating. That goes without saying. And the current targets for producing hydrogen, government production of hydrogen, are about 1/20 of our current gas use. And that doesn't account for the possible, you know, the fuel use used by vehicles as well. So we've got a long way to go, and that's by 2030, that's 8 years hence. In terms of the requirements for hydrogen to do the things we might like it to, that's a not particularly ambitious target. Probably in terms of technology, it is an ambitious target to be able to achieve that. So it doesn't yet match. So what's our next choice? Heat pumps. Heat pumps are energy multipliers. They're not perpetual energy machines. That would be lovely, but they're not. Heat pumps work like a fridge. The fridge in your kitchen uses electricity to catch heat from the cold inside the fridge, the milk, the everything else inside the fridge, and throw it out into the air around. That's why the back of the fridge is warm and needs ventilating, because it's warm. In order to keep it efficient, you need to ventilate the back of your fridge. And of course, you know, all the time, the fridge, because it can only insulate so much, there'll be a certain amount of heat going in from your kitchen into the inside of the fridge, and the compressor system in the fridge, powered by the electricity, needs to suck out that heat. And it can, you know, a heat pump, just like a fridge, can draw out more heat than is supplied by the electricity. So probably your fridge is, I don't know, coefficient of performance of 3 or 4. So 1 unit of electricity taking, let's say, 2 units of heat from the air or the ground or the fridge, will deliver 3 units of energy as heat. In terms of a fridge, it's delivering it into your kitchen. But if we're talking heat pumps, it's delivering it into a delivery system, which is very like the delivery system your gas boiler, assuming you've got one, or oil boiler or whatever you have, delivers around to the radiators in your house. So it's delivering hot, or at least thoroughly warm, water around your house. So in this case, this is called a coefficient of performance of 3. 1 unit of electricity plus 2 units of heat gives 3 units of energy. So, you know, it's a 3 times multiplier. Depending on the temperature of the source of the heat that it's drawing out, and of the destination that it's delivering it to. So this could be the air or the ground, and the heating could be your radiators, could be your hot water, it could be underfloor heating. Each of those are delivered at quite different temperatures. So let's look at a couple more sort of details of what do these things look like. An outdoor air source heat pump, well, it would be outdoors because it needs to draw heat from the outdoor air. A fan draws the air past the coils, and the compressor sits in here somewhere, and does the same job as the compressor in the back of your fridge, takes heat from one place and delivers it to another. That's where the electricity is used. Delivers heat in general to a cylinder unit, although there are ways that it can work without that, and can deliver heat to underfloor heating, radiator, and to your hot water in your house, in your home. Not so easy in some homes, but well, let's look at where we can do it and where we can't. It's most efficient where it's delivering to a reasonably warm rather than hot output. So underfloor heating has got the highest coefficient of performance. It's less efficient at delivering hot water at 60, 70. 60 usually is the, you know, what your hot water would be set at. It's a multiplier of 1.5 to 2 times that when the air temperature outside is 0 to 4. And we need most of our heating when the air temperature is low. So we need to look at its performance when the temperature outside is low. So that's roughly what we're talking about there. We need to think about seasonal performance, which is talking about essentially the difference between the performance level when the air temperature outside is 0 to 4, or when it's 15 and you only want a little top up of heat, 10 to 15, and you want a little top up of heat, because it will perform a lot more efficiently then. And we have to watch out in the salesman side of things, that we're not hijacked onto thinking that it's more efficient. I mean, if we're heating our homes right the way through the year, and we're drawing heat from outdoor air at 17, 18, then we can get a lot of high efficiency, high coefficient of performance built into the year round. It becomes less efficient as the air gets colder. That's just the way of life. More questions on that may come through later. We'll come back and have a look at it more. Ground source heat pumps draw heat from under the ground, and this is one way it can be done. It requires a fair amount of excavation in your garden or on a playing field or wherever is being excavated, or it can be done through boreholes down into the ground, down deep, not to get earth core temperature heat out, just to get heat out from the sort of 100 meters perhaps into the ground, maybe 50, where the ground temperature is steadier all the year round. So it's 8 to 12 degrees, depending on whether you're on the south coast, and Brighton or Aberdeen, let's say 8 to 12 degrees would be the sort of the range of your ground temperature. So that gives somewhat higher coefficients of performance here, but at more expense primarily because of the excavation or boring work that's needed, borehole. So some of the challenges I've referred to, they're quite expensive. So if we're going to roll this out at what did the government say, 600,000 a year by 2030, that's going to require significant financial support and incentivization to get the market to that point. So far, even our really rather good local plumber doesn't know anything about heat pumps. The skills aren't out there in the trades. They're not particularly complex skills compared to many skills that are out there. I mean, they're a stage beyond what they know at the moment, but they're a 2 or 3 day training rather than a 2 or 3 month training. Maybe it's more than 2 or 3 days plus onward support as they learn it. We also have the challenge that electricity is currently quite a lot more expensive than gas, although gas is going up at the moment. And so heating with electricity is more expensive than gas, even if we're using a multiplier effect of a heat pump. It's going to take a while for the heat pump to pay itself off because electricity is more expensive. One reason electricity is more expensive is that it's taxed in a way that gas isn't. And that may be something that I'll leave other people to look into that. So there's a bit of a subsidy and tax imbalance between electricity and gas on that. Large homes, not a great problem at all for an air source heat pump. You've got plenty of air swirling around the house. But I had a phone call with a friend of a friend recently, terraced house in Manchester. We'd like to put in a heat pump, but realistically, if we put in an air source heat pump, then the walls beside the house, the walls beside the backyard, the back of the house, we're going to end up with a cold well of air because all the heat, a lot of heat's been extracted from it. Cold well of air outside the back door probably isn't what they want. And anyway, it makes the heat pump less efficient. So it's a bit of a challenge as to where air source heat pumps can be installed on small houses. I think solutions haven't been developed yet. I think solutions will be developed, but haven't yet. Also, they're a little bit noisy. Your fridge is a little bit noisy. A heat pump is a bit bigger than a fridge. Not very much, not very noisy, but neighbours, you do have to keep them far enough from neighbours that it's not too much of a challenge. Probably nothing compared to the neighbour's stereo, but if you're in terraced housing, but that's another matter. So we want practical solutions for this one. Boreholes and ground source heat pumps are an alternative for smaller homes, but district heating from a centralized supply is probably the appropriate area to go on to here. So you can have a heat supply which supplies a grid of heating. So it can supply a series of homes, offices, factory, schools, whatever. This here looks to me as if it's a factory facility that's got waste heat, but this could be heat pumps. It could be heat pumps extracting under roads, under playing fields, under open spaces. Can't be done without excavation, without disruption, but it can be done. Centre of Bristol is currently anybody from Bristol may know, the areas of the centre of Bristol are being dug up to have heat pump mains put in underneath, across main roads and under roundabouts and all sorts, because they're able to bring in hot water from the waste facility at Avonmouth, waste incinerator at Avonmouth, bring in hot water up the Avon and discharge that into a heat main facility in the centre of Bristol. That'd be interesting to know what anybody who's local to there knows more about it. So networks can be a heat network for a single block of flats, for a single street. It can be large enough to cover an estate, a district. Universities quite often have heat networks because somehow that's just worked for them. But they can also be extended fairly readily by supplying more sources, adding more interfaces. So the heat source can be a byproduct of another process. We don't tend to like to live particularly close to most of the biggest available heat producing processes, incinerators being one of them, industrial plants being another. But there are certainly places where heat pumps would be more available on that, and maybe we just have to tune down our sensitivities a little bit on that. I don't know. So that's the sort of excavation work that would be needed for district heating. There's a flow and a return, so one of these will carry hotter and one cooler water out to the different extents of the district heating network. And they're well insulated pipes carrying your hotter and your cooler water down those. Can be supplied by power stations, energy from waste, industrial and commercial processes. Yes, basically that's solar thermal. Yes, heat networks can be supplied from solar thermal. Most of our heating isn't possible at the same time of year as we've got plenty of sun. That's actually surprisingly a more useful way to supply cooling, but not going into that today either. CHP units can use, for example, hydrogen or natural gas at the moment, or biodiesel, for example, to produce electricity at, let's say, your local supermarket, and also to provide the heat that's needed, combined heat and power. You will know that your car engine at least gets hot. What you want it to do is to produce power, in this case, drive power, but you're not, you need to get rid of the heat. This is a way of using a generator, using the heat off a generator to do useful things as well. Thermal stores, mostly just large amounts of water, can be used to smooth variations in the heat supply and demand. And yes, I was saying these systems can use a different way to produce the cooling to provide seasonal versatility there. So overall, I don't know what I'm doing on time because I can't see my time at the moment. Sadly, there's no one solution fits all that we can roll out across everybody. Different homes need subtly different approaches. But I would say absolute priority is to reduce demand. We power down before we power up. And for people who have read the Centre for Alternative Technologies work on Zero Carbon Britain, that emphasis of powering down before we power up, or alongside it, but knowing that we're powering down as being priority, comes through strongly in our work on that. And then probably using district heating for many people, heat pumps for others. District heating works best where the demand is fairly compact because you don't have to run it out so far. So isolated homes and farms won't benefit so much from the potential of district heating may need to go for heat pumps instead. You know, there's plenty of midway suburban areas where you're not quite sure whether you're compact or you're further distance. That will need sorting. Most of Copenhagen, 50% at least of Copenhagen, runs on heat pumps, not on heat pumps, on district heating. It is a familiar technology. It's well tried, well explored, and it's ready to roll out. Yes, your roads will have to be dug up again, but there we go. Digging your road up may be the least of your problems compared to sort of climate overrun. Biggest deciding factors will be the size of the demand and the building intensity. That's right. We will need policy to support and incentivize the transition to more efficient homes and the transition to heat pumps and district heating. And yeah, I believe there's a need for the government to get involved in that sort of support and incentivization. So, any questions?